Jack Thornton had spent most of his adult life working on ranches. He was a cowboy at heart, a man who loved the freedom the wide-open spaces of the West offered. But as the years passed, something inside him started to change. The endless work, the long hours, the company of cattle and horses, all of it had begun to feel like a heavy weight on his shoulders. The ranches were too crowded, the towns too noisy, and the people too many. Jack needed a break. He needed peace, something real, something that could fill the emptiness he felt inside. One evening, after another long day of hard work, Jack sat at the edge of the campfire, his tired eyes staring into the flames. The stars hung overhead like glittering diamonds, but there was a deep loneliness in his heart. He was good at his job, perhaps the best, but at the end of the day, he was always alone. It was during that quiet moment that he made a decision. He would buy a piece of land. It wasn't a big plan, and it didn't come with any grand ideas. It was simple. Jack wanted a place where he could escape. A small quiet spot far from the noise of ranch life. A shack maybe, a place to call his own. He had heard of an old man in the nearby town who was selling a small desert shack. The price was low and only $25. The man was elderly and he had no use for the land anymore. Jack decided that it was time to make a change. The desert seemed like the perfect place. The next morning, Jack packed up his things, said goodbye to his fellow ranch workers, and set off toward the town. The journey wasn't long, and soon enough he found himself standing in front of the shack. It was old, weathered by time and the harsh sun, but there was something charming about it. It sat alone on the edge of the desert, surrounded by nothing but miles of open land. For Jack, that was perfect. The old man, who looked as though he had lived many hard years, greeted him at the door. He shook Jack's hand firmly, his grip surprisingly strong for someone so frail. "You're here for the shack, I assume," the man said, his voice raspy but warm. Jack nodded. The man looked around, then motioned for Jack to follow him inside. The shack was small, just one room with a wooden floor that creaked underfoot. There was a rusty stove in the corner, a table with a couple of chairs, and a single window that looked out over the desert. The walls were bare, save for a few old tools hanging from nails. Jack could see that it hadn't been well maintained. Dust covered the furniture and the air smelled dry, like the earth itself had forgotten how to breathe. But Jack didn't mind. He wasn't looking for luxury. He wasn't looking for comfort. All he wanted was a place to be alone with his thoughts, far from the chaos of the world. He reached into his pocket and handed the old man the $25 he had saved up. The man took the money without a word, and with that, the land was Jack's. He spent the next few days settling in. There was a lot of work to do. The shack needed cleaning. The roof had a few leaks, and the surrounding land was covered in desert shrubs that made it hard to get around. But Jack didn't mind. He was used to hard work, and the thought of spending each day in peace, with only the desert and his thoughts to keep him company, filled him with a quiet sense of excitement. As he worked, Jack began to feel the weight of the past few years lifting off his shoulders. He was finally doing something for himself. It was strange, though. He had always been so focused on his work, always surrounded by people. But now that he was alone, he felt something else. An emptiness. It was as if the silence of the desert was too loud, too overwhelming. For the first time in a long time, Jack realized how much he had missed human company. In the evenings, after a long day of work, Jack would sit outside on the porch of the shack and look out over the desert. The sun would set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, and he would think about what had led him here. He had always dreamed of owning a place like this, but now that he had it, he wasn't sure what to do with himself. The isolation was peaceful, yes, but it was also a little lonely. The first few days were easy. Jack kept busy with his work, and he didn't mind being alone. But as the days turned into weeks, something started to change. The loneliness that at first seemed like a comfort began to weigh on him. There were no neighbors for miles. No one to talk to. No one to share a drink with after a hard day's work. Just the desert and the sky, both of which seemed endless and unchanging. Jack would find himself wandering the desert, looking for something to occupy his mind. He would look for wild animals, watch the way the wind moved the sand, and marvel at the beauty of the stars at night. But it wasn't enough. The emptiness inside him grew. He had always prided himself on being self-sufficient. He didn't need anyone, he thought. But now, Alone in the vastness of the desert, he began to wonder if he had made a mistake. The world was quiet here, too quiet. He had spent so many years surrounded by the sounds of cattle and horses, the chatter of fellow ranchers and the bustle of the towns. Now the silence seemed oppressive. One evening, as Jack sat on the porch staring out at the desert, he heard something strange, a noise. It was soft at first, almost like a whisper on the wind. But as he listened closer, he realized it was something more. Voices. Jack stood up, his heart racing with a mix of curiosity and surprise. He looked toward the source of the sound, but there was nothing in sight. He strained his ears, trying to make out the voices, but they were faint, like they were carried by the wind itself. Jack's mind raced. Could it be? Was there someone else out there? Maybe a traveler? Maybe someone else who had found this hidden corner of the world? He walked toward the sound, his footsteps muffled by the soft desert sand. As he got closer, the voices became clearer and his heart began to beat faster. Then, just as he rounded a bend in the dry riverbed near his shack, he froze. There by the river were 3 women. They were laughing and talking, and as Jack watched, he realized that they were bathing in the water. They were naked, their bodies glistening in the sun as they splashed and played in the cool water. Jack stood still, his breath catching in his throat. He didn't know what to do. Should he turn and leave? Should he approach them? His mind raced, but his body wouldn't move. He stood frozen, watching them from a distance, unsure whether to reveal himself or retreat back into the safety of his shack. For a long moment, Jack remained motionless, caught between the shock of the situation and his own curiosity. He had never expected to find anything like this in the desert. And in that moment he realized that life in the desert, his new life, might not be as lonely as he had thought. For a moment, Jack stood there frozen in place. His heart raced in his chest as he watched the 3 women in the river. The sound of their laughter echoed in the dry desert air, and their carefree splashing brought a strange sense of life to the otherwise still landscape. Jack had never expected to encounter anything like this in the middle of nowhere. It was a moment that felt almost surreal, like a scene from a dream. He stood there for what seemed like an eternity, unsure of what to do. Should he turn around and walk away, pretending he hadn't seen anything? Or should he risk revealing himself, possibly embarrassing both himself and the women? The decision seemed impossible. But before he could make up his mind, something unexpected happened. One of the women, the eldest of the 3, looked up. Her eyes met Jack's, and for a brief moment everything stopped. Jack's heart seemed to skip a beat, and he felt a sudden wave of panic. Had she seen him? The woman's gaze didn't waver, but instead of the anger or embarrassment Jack had feared, she broke into a wide smile. She raised her hand in a friendly wave, her laughter continuing as she playfully splashed some water at her sisters. The other 2 women, younger than her, hadn't noticed Jack yet, but the older sister's warm reaction was enough to melt his nerves. Jack stood there, still unsure of how to respond. His face burned with embarrassment. Should he wave back? Should he speak? His mind raced, and before he could make any decision, the eldest sister stood up from the river, water dripping down her body as she walked toward Jack. "Hello there," she called out cheerfully, her voice clear and inviting. "Don't just stand there, come join us. The water's fine." Jack felt his heart thump in his chest. She wasn't upset. In fact, she seemed completely at ease with the situation. And before he could stop himself, his legs moved, carrying him toward the water's edge. "I didn't mean to intrude," Jack said, his voice shaky. He could feel the awkwardness of the moment creeping up on him, but he tried to stay calm. "I didn't realize anyone was out here." The woman smiled, showing no sign of discomfort or judgment. "No harm done," she replied with a chuckle. "It's not like the desert has a crowd, right?" Her light-hearted tone helped ease some of Jack's tension, but he still wasn't sure how to proceed. The other 2 women, still unaware of his presence, continued to laugh and splash around in the water, their voices carrying in the warm desert air. Jack couldn't help but feel a bit out of place, standing there awkwardly, unsure of what was appropriate or not. "I'm Maria, by the way," the woman said, extending her hand to Jack. "And these are my sisters, Elena and Rosa." She gestured toward the younger women who were still playing in the river. "Don't worry, they won't bite." Jack hesitated for a moment, then shook her hand. "Jack," he said simply, still feeling a little out of his element. I just moved into the shack up the way." Maria's eyes brightened with curiosity. Oh, the old place? She asked, her voice full of interest. I didn't know anyone had bought it. We've passed by it a few times, but we never saw anyone. Jack nodded. Yeah, I bought it not too long ago. Just trying to get away from things. Maria gave him a sympathetic look as though she understood exactly what he meant. I get it. The desert can be lonely sometimes, but it's also beautiful if you know how to look at it. The stillness here. It's different than the noise of the world. We come out here to get away too. Her words resonated with Jack. He had chosen the desert to escape the busyness of life, to find peace. But now that he was here, he realized that peace had come with its own set of challenges. Loneliness, silence, the emptiness of a place so far removed from everything he knew. I'm still getting used to it, Jack admitted, looking out over the river. It's quieter than I expected. Maria smiled knowingly. It's quiet, all right? But sometimes that's what makes it special. You can hear yourself think, you can find yourself here, away from everything. Jack felt a strange sense of comfort in her words. He had come to the desert to find solitude, but he hadn't realized that he was also looking for something else, something deeper than just silence. Perhaps he thought it wasn't just peace he needed. Maybe he also needed connection. Maria turned her attention back to her sisters, who were still oblivious to Jack's presence. I'll tell them you're here, she said, and without another word she called out to them. Elena, Rosa! We've got company. The two younger women turned at the sound of Maria's voice, their eyes wide in surprise when they saw Jack standing by the riverbank. For a moment, they simply stared at him, unsure of what to do. But then, just like Maria, they broke into smiles, their initial surprise melting into curiosity. Well, what do you know? Elena said with a laugh. Looks like we've got a visitor. You should have said something earlier, Maria. Jack felt himself blush, his awkwardness returning. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to. No need to apologize, Rosa said, her voice light and playful. We've all got our own ways of finding a little company out here. You're not the first person to stumble upon us, and you certainly won't be the last. Jack's face turned even redder, but the sisters seemed genuinely amused, not bothered in the slightest by his unintentional intrusion. Maria came back to his side, giving him a reassuring smile. Don't worry, you're welcome to stay. It's not every day we get a visitor out here. For the next hour, Jack found himself sitting on the riverbank, listening to the sisters chat and laugh. They were kind and easygoing, and their presence was surprisingly comforting. They spoke about the desert, about their family, and about the little things that made life in such a remote place bearable. Maria, Elena, and Rosa were unlike anyone Jack had met before. They were strong, independent, and full of life. It was clear they knew the desert well and had lived with its challenges all their lives. They didn't just endure the isolation, they embraced it. They found joy in the quiet moments, in the beauty of the land, and in each other's company. For the first time since arriving in the desert, Jack felt a sense of belonging. It wasn't the kind of companionship he had imagined, but it was companionship all the same. The sisters were kind, welcoming, and full of laughter. Jack realized that perhaps he hadn't truly understood what he was looking for when he bought the shack. He had thought it was just solitude he needed. But now, in the company of these three women, he saw that maybe what he needed most was connection. And for the first time, Jack felt like he wasn't so alone anymore. The days that followed Jack's unexpected encounter by the river seemed to pass in a blur. After that first meeting, he began to look forward to the sisters' visits. They were regulars at the river, coming out to bathe and relax, and Jack found himself spending more and more time by the water, sometimes just watching them from a distance, other times joining them to talk. Maria, Elena, and Rosa were not like anyone Jack had met before. They were free-spirited and wild in the best way. They lived off the land in a way that Jack had always admired but never truly understood. They weren't rich in money, but they were rich in knowledge. Knowledge about the desert, about survival, and about the little joys of life that made it all worth living. At first, Jack only joined them in small ways. He would sit by the riverbank, offering only a few words here and there, still unsure how to behave around the sisters. But over time, their warm personalities began to melt his reserve. Maria's calm, wise demeanor made him feel at ease, while Elena's infectious laughter and Rosa's lively spirit kept him smiling. They were so different from the ranch hands Jack had worked with for years. No talk of cattle or business. just honest conversation and stories about life in the desert. One afternoon, as Jack was helping Maria carry some firewood back to the shack, she turned to him and said, "You know, Jack, you don't have to be so quiet all the time. We're not going to bite you." Her voice was teasing, but her smile was warm. Jack chuckled softly, feeling the awkwardness rise again. "I don't mean to be quiet. I've never really been around people like you. I guess I'm not used to the company." Maria paused for a moment, then looked at him thoughtfully. "You're a quiet man, Jack, but you don't have to hide in the silence. You're not alone here, not anymore." Her words felt like a weight had been lifted from his shoulders. For the first time in a long while, Jack realized she was right. He had been hiding in his own silence, thinking that solitude was what he needed. But now he saw that it was the company of others that had brought him peace. Over the next few days, Jack began to open up more, sharing stories of his past with the sisters. He told them about his time on the ranch, the long, lonely nights when he'd lie awake under the stars, missing something he couldn't quite name. He told them about his longing for a place to call his own, a place to escape from the noise of the world. The sisters listened intently, nodding as Jack spoke. They understood the feeling of longing. They had their own stories. Stories of growing up in the desert, learning to fend for themselves, and the challenges of living so far from civilization. But they also told Jack about the beauty they had found in their lives. They spoke about the sunrise over the mountains, the way the desert transformed at night with the light of the moon, and the way the wind carried the scent of the earth. One evening, as the sun began to set, Jack sat with Maria by the fire, watching the flames dance in the quiet air. The sky above them turned a deep purple and the first stars began to twinkle. Maria looked over at Jack and asked, "Have you ever thought about staying here, Jack?" "For good?" The question caught Jack off guard. He hadn't really thought about it that way. When he had bought the shack, it was meant to be a temporary escape, a place to spend a few quiet years before moving on. But now, sitting here with Maria and feeling the warmth of the fire, he realized something. The desert had begun to feel like home, and it wasn't just the place that was starting to feel familiar. It was the people. "I don't know," Jack admitted. "I thought it was just a place to hide away for a while. But now I'm not so sure." He paused, his eyes focused on the fire. "I never thought I'd find a place like this with people like you. It's different, you know. I never thought I'd feel like I belonged here." Maria smiled, her eyes softening. "Sometimes, Jack, the place you're looking for is closer than you think. You might find what you need without even realizing it." Her words stayed with Jack long after that evening. He found himself thinking about them as he worked around the shack, and when he sat alone in the evenings looking out at the vast desert. He had come here to escape, to find solitude, but he had found so much more than that. He had found something that he had been missing for years, a sense of connection. A few days later, the sisters invited Jack to visit their home. It was a small, simple house on the edge of a settlement, surrounded by the same dry desert landscape that Jack had come to know. The house was nothing fancy, but there was a warmth to it, a sense of comfort that Jack couldn't quite explain. The walls were decorated with handmade crafts and simple decorations, each one telling a story of their lives. The smell of food cooking filled the air, and Jack felt a sense of belonging he hadn't felt in a long time. They shared a meal together, talking and laughing as if they had known each other for years. Maria, Elena, and Rosa made Jack feel like part of their family. The sisters had no judgment, no pretense. They were open and honest, and Jack felt himself relaxing in their presence. He realized that this was the connection he had been searching for, not just in the desert, but in life. As the evening wore on, Jack found himself laughing with them, sharing stories and even joking around. He didn't feel like the lonely cowboy anymore. He felt like a man who had finally found his place in the world. Later that night, as Jack made his way back to the shack, he couldn't help but think about how much things had changed. He had come to the desert expecting to find peace through isolation, but instead he had found it through connection. The desert, which had once seemed so vast and empty, now felt full of possibilities. Jack had learned that sometimes the right people can make a place feel like home, even if it's a place you never expected to settle in. As he sat down on the porch of his shack, Jack looked up at the stars, his heart full of gratitude. The quiet of the desert no longer felt like a burden. It felt like a gift. He wasn't alone anymore. He had found his place in the world, not in the solitude he had sought, but in the company of the sisters who had shown him the true meaning of connection. Jack had settled into a new rhythm in the desert. The once lonely and quiet shack had become more than just a place to sleep. It was now a part of his life, a life that was unexpectedly richer and fuller than he could have ever imagined. Every day the sisters continued to visit him, each time bringing something new, a basket of fresh fruit from their small garden, a story from their childhood, or simply their company, which Jack had come to cherish more than he could express. It wasn't just the time by the river that Jack looked forward to anymore. The desert, which once seemed vast and isolating, now felt warm and inviting. The sisters had opened up a whole new world to him. It wasn't just about surviving in the desert anymore. It was about living, truly living. Maria, Elena, and Rosa taught Jack many things that he hadn't known before. They taught him about the plants in the desert, how certain herbs could be used for healing, how some flowers bloomed only at night, and how the desert's dry silence held its own kind of magic. They taught him how to read the stars and follow the patterns of the wind, things that had once seemed so foreign to him but now felt familiar. Jack had always thought he knew what hard work was. But as he spent more time with the sisters, he realized just how much he had taken for granted. The way they worked, the way they lived. It was nothing like what Jack had grown up with. The sisters weren't just surviving, they were thriving. They found beauty in the simplest things, and it was something Jack admired deeply. He had spent his life working on ranches, focused solely on cattle, but here in the desert, he was learning that there was so much more to life than what he had known. One afternoon, as Jack was sitting by the fire at the shack, Maria sat down next to him. The sun was just beginning to set, casting a soft golden light over the desert. The air was still, almost as if the world was holding its breath. Maria looked over at Jack, her expression thoughtful. "You know," she said slowly, "sometimes it's easy to forget how much we have, especially when we're so far from everything. But the desert gives you exactly what you need. It teaches you to be patient, to wait for the right moment. It teaches you to appreciate the little things." Jack nodded, his gaze focused on the flames dancing in the fire. He had heard Maria's words many times before, but today they felt different. He could see the truth in them. He had come here thinking he would escape everything. But what he had found was something far more valuable, a deeper understanding of himself and the world around him. The desert wasn't a place of emptiness. It was a place of quiet wisdom. Maria continued, "The desert is honest. It doesn't lie. It shows you who you are, whether you like it or not. It's a good place to find yourself, Jack." Jack felt a sense of peace wash over him. For the first time since he had arrived in the desert, he felt as though he truly understood what Maria meant. The desert had a way of stripping away everything unnecessary, leaving only what was real. There were no distractions here, no noise, no false pretenses. What you saw was what you got. As the days went by, Jack began to spend more time helping the sisters with their daily chores. They had a small vegetable garden near their home, and they grew enough to feed themselves and share with their neighbors. Jack had never been much of a gardener, but he was eager to learn. The work was hard, but it felt good. It was different from the ranch work he had known, but it was satisfying in a way he hadn't expected. One day, while they were planting seeds together, Elena turned to Jack with a grin. "You know, you're getting pretty good at this," she said, wiping the sweat from her brow. "I think you might be ready to join us in the real work now." Jack chuckled, feeling a sense of pride. "I've still got a lot to learn, but I'm getting there." "Good," Rosa added from behind them, her voice teasing. "Because we could use someone with your muscles around here." The sisters laughed, and Jack couldn't help but smile. It felt good to be part of something, to feel like he was contributing to something greater than himself. He had spent so many years working alone, thinking that solitude was the answer. But now, in the company of the sisters, he was beginning to see that true fulfillment came not from escaping the world, but from connecting with it. As the weeks passed, Jack's bond with the sisters deepened. They weren't just his neighbors anymore. They had become his friends, his family. They had welcomed him into their lives without hesitation, and Jack had come to realize that this connection, this sense of belonging, was exactly what he had been searching for all along. One evening, as they sat together around the fire, Maria turned to Jack, her eyes thoughtful. "I've been thinking," she said. "You've been here for a while now. Have you ever thought about staying for good? The question caught Jack off guard. He had never really considered staying long-term. The shack had always been meant to be a temporary escape, but as the days passed, he found himself growing more attached to the place, to the sisters, and to the quiet life they shared. I don't know, Jack said slowly. I came here to get away, but I think I found something I wasn't expecting. Maria nodded, her eyes understanding. You don't have to decide right away. Just know that you're welcome here. This place, this life, it's yours too if you want it. Her words were simple, but they carried a weight that Jack couldn't ignore. He had come to the desert looking for solitude, but what he had found was something far more precious: connection. The desert had shown him a different way of living, one where peace wasn't found in isolation but in community. The next few weeks passed in a blur of work, laughter, and stories shared around the fire. Jack continued to help the sisters with their daily tasks, learning new things every day. He became more involved in their lives and they in his. They shared meals, swapped stories, and enjoyed the simple pleasures of life in the desert. It wasn't a perfect life. There were still challenges, still hard days, but it was a life that felt right to Jack. One evening, as the sun set over the desert, Jack sat on the porch of his shack, watching the colors change in the sky. For the first time since he had arrived, he felt truly at peace. The loneliness he had once felt had faded into the background, replaced by a sense of belonging he had never known. Maria appeared beside him, her smile warm. You've come a long way, Jack, she said softly. The desert's a good teacher, isn't it? Jack nodded, a smile tugging at the corners of his lips. It sure is. For the first time in a long time, Jack didn't feel the urge to escape. He didn't need to run anymore. The desert, with all its silence and space, had taught him something invaluable. It wasn't just about finding peace in solitude. It was about finding peace in connection, in people, in the land, and in the moments that made life worth living. Jack woke up early one morning, as he had become accustomed to since settling in the desert. The sun had just begun to rise, casting a golden light over the barren landscape, and Jack sat for a moment on the edge of his small porch, taking in the quiet beauty of the desert. It was a kind of peace he had never known before, and now it felt like home. The emptiness that had once bothered him no longer felt lonely. Instead, it felt like an open space where he could breathe deeply and think clearly. As he stood up, stretching his stiff muscles, Jack glanced toward the hills in the distance. He could see the sisters' home in the small settlement not far from his shack, a place he had come to visit regularly. Their visits were no longer just about helping one another with chores or tending to the land. They had become an essential part of Jack's life. He had found something in them that he had not expected. A real connection. A sense of belonging that had been missing from his life for so long. The thought of the desert had once made him feel as though he was running away from everything. But now, after months of spending time with Maria, Elena, and Rosa, he realized that he hadn't been running away at all. Instead, he had been searching for something he didn't even know he needed. In the quiet companionship of the sisters, Jack had found the peace he had been seeking, but also something more. He had found purpose. Over the last few months, Jack had worked alongside the sisters, helping them with the garden and small repairs around their home. He was no longer a stranger to the desert. It had become a part of him. Jack even started to think of it as a place of opportunity. He had spent so many years working for others, and now, for the first time in his life, he was working for himself, learning how to live off the land, finding fulfillment in the work he did each day. Maria had always said that the desert taught patience, and Jack was beginning to understand just how true that was. He was learning to be patient with the land, with himself, and with his future. The days weren't rushed or chaotic anymore. They were steady, with small goals and rewards that came from hard work. Jack found that the simpler the life, the more satisfying it became. One evening, as Jack was finishing up the firewood for the evening, he noticed something strange in the distance. At first he thought it was just the shifting heat making the air ripple, but as he watched closer, he saw a figure walking toward him. His heart skipped a beat. It was Maria, walking alone through the desert, her figure framed against the setting sun. Jack wiped his hands on his pants and walked toward her, unsure of what she was doing out here alone. As he got closer, Maria smiled at him, but there was a glint of something in her eyes. something that made Jack pause. "Maria," Jack said, his voice full of concern. "What's going on? Why are you out here by yourself?" Maria stopped and looked at him, her expression soft but serious. "I've been thinking," she began, her voice calm and steady, "about the life you've built here, about how much you've changed since you came to this desert. You've become part of this land now, Jack. You're more than just a man hiding away from the world. You're someone who's learning how to live." Jack didn't quite know what to say. He had never really thought about how much he had changed since his first day in the desert. It felt like a lifetime ago, when he had driven into the desert shack with nothing but the desire for solitude. But now, after all the time spent with the sisters, the hard work, and the growing connection to the land, Jack felt like he had finally found something he didn't know he needed. "I guess I never expected to find this," Jack said, gesturing to the desert around him. "When I first came here, I thought I was running away. I thought being alone would make everything easier. But now I realize it's the people I've met, the sisters that have made it all worthwhile. I don't feel alone anymore." Maria nodded thoughtfully, her eyes full of understanding. "The desert can make you feel alone, but sometimes the right people come into your life when you least expect it. You're not alone anymore, Jack. You've found your place here. You've found your family." Jack swallowed hard, feeling a lump in his throat. He had never really thought of the sisters as his family, but now it seemed so clear. They had welcomed him into their lives from the beginning, and through them Jack had discovered something deeper than just companionship. He had found a sense of belonging that he never thought he could have. It wasn't just about surviving in the desert anymore. It was about thriving with the people who cared about him. Maria continued, "I've been thinking, Jack. You've made this place your home, but you've also built something more than just a shack in the desert. You've found peace here. You've found a way to live in the silence of the desert and make it a part of who you are, and that's something special." Jack looked down at the sand beneath his feet, taking in her words. It was true. He had come here looking for an escape, and now he had found a life that was full of purpose, connection, and even a bit of adventure. The desert had once felt like a barren, empty place, but now it felt alive, vibrant and full of promise. "I never imagined it would turn out like this," Jack said softly, his voice filled with gratitude. "I came here to be alone, but I found something much more valuable. I found peace, yes, but I also found people who cared. And that's something I didn't think I could find in a place like this." Maria smiled, her eyes twinkling with warmth. "The desert can be a teacher. It shows you what you need to see. And sometimes it teaches you that you don't need to be alone to be at peace." As the evening wore on, Jack and Maria sat together, watching the stars slowly fill the sky. The night air was cool now, and Jack could feel the weight of the day's work lifting from his shoulders. He had found a sense of calm, a sense of purpose that he had never experienced before. The desert had become his home, not because it was empty and quiet, but because it had become a place of connection, of growth, and of finding meaning in the simplest of things. The next morning, Jack woke up early as he always did. But this time, when he stepped outside to greet the dawn, he felt different. He wasn't the man who had arrived here months ago, looking for an escape. He was a man who had found something real, something lasting. The sun rose over the desert, casting a golden light on everything it touched. And for the first time in a long time, Jack felt like he had found exactly where he was meant to be. Jack wasn't alone anymore. He was part of something bigger than himself, part of a community, part of the land, and most importantly, part of a family that had welcomed him with open arms. The desert had shown him what he needed to see, that sometimes the greatest peace comes not from escaping the world, but from finding a way to live in it, surrounded by those who care. And for the first time in a long time, Jack felt at home.